I'm Lester Laminack, and I'm going to take the next few minutes to read a book with you. It's called The King of Bees. It's a book that I wrote, and it's illustrated by Jim LaMarche. Would you like to see a picture of Jim? This is him right here on the back. Jim lives in California, and that's me up there. I live in North Carolina. I'm going to take the dust jacket off so we can see the book just a little better. The King of Bees. As we look at the end papers, you can see the setting for the book. The setting is the place where the story happens. And this story happens out in the country, on a marsh in South Carolina. The King of Bees by Lester Laminack. That's me. With illustrations by Jim LaMarche. Henry and Aunt Lilla live deep in the Lowcountry, where South Carolina reaches out and mingles with the salt water to form tidal creeks and marshes. Sometimes Henry felt like the whole world ended at the far edge of that water. Their small wooden house had a tucked-in porch and a ghost of white paint. Out back there was a vegetable garden, a hen house, an old shed, and Henry's favorite, the beehives. Henry felt something special for those beehives. Henry could hardly wait to help with the bees. Aunt Lilla finally agreed that he could watch her check the hive boxes. He waited eagerly at the door of the shed as she stepped into her bee suit and put on the hat with the net that protected her face. She let Henry carry the smoker she used to calm the bees. "A bee won't sting you unless you get in the way of what she's doing," Aunt Lilla told him as they made their way back to the hives. "But you got to stay a good ways back for now," she warned. "Climb up on that stump while I'm working, and you'll see everything just fine." Aunt Lilla spoke softly while she lifted the frames to see how the bees were doing. "What are you saying to 'em?" Henry asked. "Oh, I'm giving 'em a little encouragement." She spoke louder to be sure he could hear her. "You girls are busy fanning this morning. Got to get that honey ready, don't you?" Henry listened to the bees. "Aunt Lilla," he called, "when the bees hum, are they talking back to you?" "No, Henry. Sister bees hum when they're working. If they have news to tell, they do their talking dance. That's how a bee shows her sisters where to find the best flowers." "How come you always talk about sister bees?" Henry asked. "Don't they have any brother bees?" Aunt Lilla chuckled. "Oh, well, there are a few boy bees to mate with the queen. They don't do much else except eat." For weeks, Henry pestered Aunt Lilla about helping with the hives. "There's plenty of time for that," she said. "You got some growing to do first." He would have to be patient because Aunt Lilla was particular about certain things. He remembered when she let him gather eggs from the hen house all by herself. That first day he had tried to take too many at a time and dropped one. Aunt Lilla wasn't upset, but her voice was serious. "You've got to be extra careful, Henry. Those eggs are food and money for us." He learned quickly how to slip the eggs from the nest. Now he enjoyed gathering them every day. One morning, Henry decided to explore the shed where Aunt Lilla kept her beekeeping tools. He examined the uncapping fork and the hive tool. He touched the smoker. He opened a bottle of bee drops and sniffed them. Aunt Lilla had told him how much the bees liked the smell. His eyes came to rest on the bee suit. He was certain there was something magic about it. He just knew if he had one of his own, he could get closer to the hives and bee talk, just like Aunt Lilla. Henry left the shed and found Aunt Lilla in the garden. "How come the brother bees don't help the sisters?" he asked. "Can't the king bee make 'em do some work?" "Well, Henry," she said, "the hive's like a big family that's got one queen and a whole bunch of sisters. The sister bees clean the hive and bring in nectar and pollen to feed all the bees. They make the honey and take care of the queen, too." "They don't have a king?" he asked. "No, I reckon the bee family gets along just fine with only a queen." Henry thought about this. "Aunt Lilla, it's not right for the sisters to do all the work. If I was a bee, I'd do a lot to help my sisters, just like I help you with the hens and the garden." Day after day went by. Henry watched the sisters buzzing in and out of the hive boxes. Henry imagined the bees doing their talking dance inside the hive, telling all the other sisters where to find flowers. One morning, Henry jumped off a stump and did a little dance of his own. He was telling the bees how to find the big patch of clover blooming on the backside of Mr. Craven's pasture. When Henry hummed and danced, he was a bee. He knew this for sure and certain when he saw the sister bees buzzing in that clover patch the next day. Before long, Henry noticed a lot of activity around the hives. Aunt Lilla noticed too. "Looks like the bees are fixing to swarm," she said. "I suspect we're about to get a new queen." "What's going to happen to our queen, Aunt Lilla?" Henry asked. "The old queen will fly off with a bunch of sisters and search for a new spot to make another hive," she said. "Will they really try to leave us?" Henry asked. "They could. We got to do all we can to keep them here. We depend on that honey about as much as those bees do." More and more sister bees flew out and circled the hives. "I best hurry," she said. "I'll set up another box over by the tupelo tree." Henry wanted to do something to help. Maybe he could tell the bees about the new box. But he'd have to get closer to the hives. He went into the shed. He lifted Aunt Lilla's bee suit off the peg and stepped into it. He pushed up the long sleeves and pulled up the legs until he could see his shoes. As he reached for the hat, he tipped over the bottle of bee drops, and some of the liquid spilled out. Henry put the lid back on the bottle and returned it to the shelf. Then he wiped his hands on the bee suit and stumbled out of the shed. That too big bee suit made it hard to walk, but Henry was determined to let the bees know about the new box. He shuffled past the watching stump. This was the closest he had ever been to the hive boxes. Sister bees were buzzing in and out like never before, and the hum made his skin tingle. He stood still and listened. The sound of it got inside of him. Slowly he began to move, careful not to trip. He danced to tell the bees they didn't have to leave. Dancing in that big, bulky bee suit made Henry so tired. He had to go rest a while. He trudged across the yard, dragging it behind him like a shadow. He didn't even notice the bees were following him. Henry climbed the porch steps and stretched out on the bench. A low buzz caught his attention. He lay perfectly still and watched as the swarm of bees settled on the bee suit. When Aunt Lilla came onto the porch, she stopped on the top step. "Henry," she called softly. "Look, Aunt Lilla," he said. "The sister bees decided to stay." "Don't move," she whispered. "I'll run fetch the smoker just to be safe." Henry hummed softly. A few minutes later, Aunt Lilla returned with the smoker. She puffed clouds of white smoke over the bees, and then carefully lifted the bee suit from Henry's legs and carried it away. When Aunt Lilla came back, she said, "I set the bee suit down by the box, and the bees went right for it." She pulled Henry close. "I'm proud of you, Henry." "The bees were leaving, Aunt Lilla. I had to tell them about the new box." "Were you scared when all those bees were on you?" she asked. "No, ma'am. I can bee talk now just like you," he said. "They came to say thank you because I was a helpful brother bee." Henry looked out toward the hives. "Aunt Lilla, those bees will stay with us. I just know it. I reckon they think I'm the king bee." Aunt Lilla smiled and said, "And I reckon you'll be a good one." When you finish the story, I hope that you'll take some time to just think about all the things you know about bees. Maybe take a few minutes to think of questions you'd like to ask, because this story has a lot of information about bees. I'm guessing you learned a few things that you didn't know about honeybees. Talk with someone and jot down the questions that this book makes you want to ask. And then take a look at your library and look for books that are nonfiction, stories and information books, maybe poems, magazines. Read books about honeybees and see if they can help you answer some of your questions. I'm guessing that each time you read something new and answer some of the questions you have from this book, that suddenly you'll have new words that you didn't have before, new ideas that you didn't know before, and you'll be able to ask brand new questions that you couldn't ask before. Then take some time and think about what you can do in the world to help bees survive. Without bees, we would have no honey. And that'd be pretty sad, because honey is really good stuff. But bees are even more important than making honey. Bees are very essential pollinators. They help us to have much of the food that people have in their diets. See if you can find out how essential bees are to the production of the food that people eat. That's a challenge. In the spring, when you're planting flowers, think about putting flowers out that attract bees. Talk to someone in your local garden shop about which plants attract pollinators and put those in your yard so the bees will come and visit, take the nectar and the pollen, and go back to their hives and make honey and feed their hives and keep the bee population healthy. Have fun reading.